Hello there, Jelly here, and I'm also planning on beating every N64 game, all on original hardware and using no guides, just a bit of backseating from chat. All games are chosen randomly, so I have no idea what's coming next. You can catch each game live over my Twitch channel at twitch.tv/softjellyfish. On the previous episode, we saved Whoopee World while playing Rocket Robot on Wheels. Feel free to check that video out if you haven't already. It is now time to have probably the most chill session yet. It is time for Pilotwings 64. Released in 1996 in North America and Japan, and in 1997 in Europe, Pilotwings was one of the 3 launch titles of the N64, and it's a sequel to the Super Nintendo game. It's a game that some people consider to be some kind of tech demo for the N64, as it showcases the kind of 3D rendering that the console can do. My experience with this game is pretty limited actually. I've always known about this game, I've seen it being played in stuff like speedrunning events and so on, both this and the Super Nintendo version. And of course I knew about the soundtrack, especially the glider one, which is the one from the very first level. But outside of that, I wasn't really sure what to expect, especially gameplay wise. I didn't know if it was going to be an easy game or a very complicated one. So you could say that in a way I'm going in blind, even though I've seen a handful of levels already. So what would the clear condition for this one be? Well, it's simple, we have to clear every single license, meaning getting at least bronze on every single class. So let's talk a little bit about the game, alright? In this game you're expected to do a lot of flying in different vehicles. You've got a glider, you've got a rocket belt, which is basically a jetpack, and you've got a gyrocopter. And those 3 are the ones that we're going to be focusing on for this playthrough. The game consists of 4 different classes, 1 for each vehicle. And of course they get harder and harder as they go. So let me list them for you. There's beginner class, which consists of only 1 test. Then there's class A, which consists of 2. Class B, which consists of 3, and then there's Pilot class, which also consists of 3. Before you start any of the classes with any of the vehicles, the game will let you know how many points you need to get a medal. At first, every single one of the classes except for the beginner ones are locked. And to have access to the more difficult classes, you need at least a bronze medal with each vehicle. Before you start the class, you also get to pick a character. There are 6 total characters, each named after a bird. Honestly, I'm not really sure if it makes a difference who you pick at all. I don't know if there are stats, it doesn't really show anything. But I went with Hawk because I think he looks pretty cool. Alright, so now that I've given you this small overview, it's time to go over to the first class, the beginner class. So once you pick a vehicle, in this case the glider, you'll reach this screen that I guess we can call the test screen, where you will have the name of the test and also what the objective is for it. You can also check the map to plan out your route. Alright, so it's time for the very first glider test, the Albatross Nest. All of these tests in beginner class will happen in Holiday Island, which is the very first island that you get access to. There are other islands, but I will explain them as they come. So for this very first challenge, all we have to do is to fly through rings. So since it's so basic, let me just explain more or less how the glider works. Since it doesn't really have an engine, you'll be constantly losing speed, and in order to gain speed, you have to basically point your nose down. But obviously you don't really do this forever because you will just end up in the ground. So you have to constantly balance going up and down, up and down. Later on you can use wind currents that can push you up without having to use a lot of speed. Also, all of this I'm saying applies when going on a straight line, because as soon as you start turning, you will start losing a lot of speed. So it's very important to plan when you're going with the glider. So I think that's really it for the glider. That was test 1 and it was very easy. Let's move on to the next vehicle, the rocket belt. So this stage is called Balloon Crash. The objective is just to go on top of the castle and destroy this balloon. Then all you have to do is land the rocket belt. So again, let me explain more or less how the rocket belt works. So in order to move, you press either A or B depending on how powerful you want the jetpack to be. But this will only get you to move up, and once you release the button, you'll just fall straight down. If you want to move forward, you have to tilt the joystick forward. And if you want to move backwards, well, you move it backwards. You can also press Z to hover in place, but this uses a lot of fuel. This is probably the hardest one for me to use, because it feels very floaty, and it's also kind of hard to know where you're landing. Even though if you press R, you can change the camera angle. But that's really it. Let's move on to the next class. It's now time for the gyrocopter. And the first task is novice rings, which, well, you guessed it, we have to go through rings, and we have to land this thing as well. And again, let me explain more or less how it works. This one will be very short, because this thing basically controls like a plane. You will usually start from the runway, you will have to take off, then it has inverted controls, you can even shoot missiles with it, and then you will have to land it the same way that you would probably land a plane in any other game. So overall, it doesn't really have anything special about it, however, this is by far my favorite vehicle. Also, I can't really keep myself from tilting my head, I don't know why it happens. It's completely subconscious, and you'll see it happening even more on the harder classes. But that was it really for the beginner classes. Let's move on to class A now. As usual, we start with the glider. The glider this time will take us to Everfrost Island, and we have 2 tests to do. The first one is called Shutterbug, where all we have to do is just fly around, take a picture of the fire, and then land. It wasn't too difficult. Actually, at this point, for some reason I just wasn't reading the objectives, so I kinda had to reset it twice because I just didn't know what to do, so that's on me. The second test is called Chicken Dive, and we start at the very top of a mountain, where this is basically a Red Bull worthy event. We just dive from the top and we go through a bunch of rings, and then we have to do a very sharp turn in order not to hit the mountain, which I eventually did because I was going so fast and then I had this horrible catastrophic accident. I had to repeat a couple of times because I wasn't fully sure exactly what the best route was. I even had another accident, but eventually we got it. Next up, it's the Rocket Belt, and this time it's in the Little States, which is basically an island in the shape of the United States. It's the biggest map there is, and it even has some of the famous landmarks from the country. The first test is called Metropolis Dance, where we have to fly through a bunch of rings in a city that looks a lot like Los Angeles. The order in which you fly through the rings doesn't really matter, all you have to do is try to do it fast. And of course at the end you have to land. These rocket belt levels are already starting to get kinda complicated. Landing was a bit rough, but we still managed to get a decent amount of points. The second test is called Touch and Go. This one is even harder. You have to land on these very tiny platforms. At this point I hadn't figured out yet how to change the camera angle, so I had a really hard time aligning myself to land properly on the little platforms. And of course your score will depend on how fast you go from one platform to the other. I still somehow got a silver. I'm not really sure how, because I really felt like I was doing a terrible job at this. But anyways, enough of that, let's go over to the gyrocopter. The gyrocopter's test will happen in Crescent Island. There's really nothing much to say about this island, it kinda just looks like a beach resort really. But anyways, the very first test, it's called Sky Maneuvers, which is another flying through ring stage. Except that this one is just a little bit longer and it requires a bit more precision to do properly. The second test is called Bullseye, and these are my favorite kinds of tests. Basically, we'll finally get to use our missiles, and all we have to do is destroy a bunch of targets and then land. You can also shoot these targets from really far away, it's kinda surprising really, and it just feels super satisfying to land these shots. But on a small parenthesis, can you imagine being on vacation in this island and seeing a gyrocopter flying around shooting missiles at stuff? Imagine if they miss. So after that we're done with Class A. Now it's time for Class B. Now we go over to the glider in Crescent Island, and the very first test is called Velocity Square. In this one we must use the wind currents to ascend to 400 meters and then land on top of the mountain. Doesn't sound too difficult. While these wind currents appeared in previous levels, this is the first time where we will actually use them. At least in my opinion as well, it's kinda difficult to tell where these wind currents start, especially if you're coming in from the bottom. But honestly, it is still pretty forgiving. Even if it looks like you won't be getting into the wind current, you'll still be pushed up. It's also super important to manage your speed, because if you go too slow you will just drop, even if you are in the wind current. Eventually we make it to the top, but it was a horrible landing. I think Hawk broke his legs here. The second test is called Shutterbug 2, and this one is another picture taking stage. We must take a picture of a whale and a fountain in front of a hotel, and then land. While reading the description of the objectives, I was thinking, how hard can this be? Well, it turns out that it's actually very difficult, because whoever is judging these pictures has very high standards. Even if I take a point blank picture of the whale, it's still not enough for them. I also had a couple of really catastrophic landings here. I think this is the first mission that it actually took a bit of time to complete, but eventually we got an acceptable score. Test number 3 is called Seagull Wing. Anyways, this is a time objective and we must get from point A to B in exactly 3 minutes. It's a nice twist to the time formula, where usually you will have to get there before a timer runs out. Also, you won't get any points if you arrive too early, which it did happen to me. I got there about 30 seconds too early and I got 0. On my second attempt, I made it about 7 seconds early and I got a pretty nice score from it. So the plan at first was to finish all the vehicles before moving to the next class, but I wasn't really feeling the glider honestly, so instead I decided to just finish all the classes for it. So let's go over to pilot class, just for the glider. This time the glider tests will take place on the Little States. Test number 1 is called Thermal Flyer. It's the same as before. Go through the currents and then land. However, there is no height limit. Instead, you'll be given 4 minutes to get as high as you can. Once the 4 minutes are up, the currents will disappear and you'll be able to land. At first I thought that you had to do everything within 4 minutes, so I was kinda rushing and didn't make it as high as I wanted to. But on the second attempt we got a more respectable score. Test number 2 is called Rising Creek. In here there are 15 rings in total, and we must go through at least 8 of them to receive points. It seems pretty easy when described this way, but the rings are spread all over the canyon, and it's very difficult to manage speed and height. So I needed multiple tries to plan out a route that made sense. Eventually I ended up completing it, but I wasn't really happy with my score at all. And finally, test number 3, Shutterbug 3. In here we must take pictures of Missy the monster, a passenger boat, and a space shuttle, and then we must land. Sounds simple enough, but I'm just wondering if whoever is going to be judging my pictures will have high standards as well. Hell, I'll be taking pictures of a cryptid here. And you guessed it, the pictures are not good. I'm not sure what else to do here. I was missing a bit of points here, so I went back to test number 2 to improve my score. Eventually we got the bronze medal, and now it's time to go back to class B. Let's do the rocket belt. The test will take place in the Everfrost Island, and test number 1 is called Balloon Bonanza, where we gotta fly around and pop all the balloons and then land. Again, I struggled a lot because it's really hard to be precise with the rocket belt. Once I even misjudged the height that I was in, I just fell straight into the water. And of course the floaty controls make it pretty difficult in general. In the end we got a pretty meh score in this one. Test number 2 is called More Rings, and we'll have to fly through a bunch of rings and then land. This is another one of those easy at first until you see how the rings are set up kind of stage. There's a couple of time rings which I assume give better score. I'm not really sure honestly, I went through them still. I got a dreadful score at first, so I decided to run it back, and the second time we did much better. Test number 3 is called Ironhead, and finally we get something a bit different. We must push this giant bouncy green ball over to the goal. This one actually sounded very complicated and I was expecting the worst, but it turns out it was very fun and kinda easy actually. Look at this score! So that's it for the Rocket Belt B class. Now it's the gyrocopter's turn. This one takes us to the little states again. Test number 1 is called River Run, and it's another ring flying stage, pretty self-explanatory by this point. I actually got kinda lost at first because I was going so fast. Also look at my head, these are the levels where my head really starts tilting a lot. It's like I subconsciously feel like I'm in the cockpit. Also look at my face, why do I look so pissed? I was really locked in this section. Anyways, this level changed it up a little by having some white rings, which I assume give more points. Also right before the end, a spaceship takes off and it straight up tanks the frame rate. I'm 100% blaming that for my crappy landing. Test number 2 is called Metal Horizon, and it's another missile stage, so I'm really excited. This takes place in what I assume is the Grand Canyon. I didn't mention it earlier, I just think that's what this is. You gotta plan out your path to not spend a lot of fuel and to be able to hit the targets without wasting much time. Eventually we get an okay-ish score. I wasn't expecting having to land in another city, so that caught me a bit off guard. The final test in Class B is Hawk Attack, and this one is a boss battle. There's this giant Mecha Hawk that's attacking the city, and we must take it out. It takes 5 missiles to take out Mecha Hawk, and you would expect this to be easy, but it turns out Mecha Hawk is fast as hell, can dodge your missiles. So what's up with my face, man? I cannot get over about my locked in face. This is how I look? I just noticed now that I'm checking the footage, jeez. The boss doesn't really do much, it runs in very erratic patterns, so getting properly aligned to hit it is surprisingly difficult. I mean, look at these dodges, just nonchalantly moving out of the way without even looking at the rocket. After what felt like a super long time, we take him out, and now we must land. Alright, now it's time to finish off the pilot class, and we start with the rocket belt in Crescent Island. Test number 1 is called Dark Cavern, and we must fly through a cavern as quickly as possible, then fly through the goal ring at the end. Upon reading the description, I was not looking forward to this, especially since I struggle a lot with the rocket belt. Each time you crash on a wall, you are deducted 2 points. But surprisingly, it's not as punishing as you would expect. I finished with a pretty decent score. Test number 2 is called Diamond Head. It's another push big bouncing ball into goal stage. This one is a bit trickier because you start on top of a mountain and you must push the ball all the way down. It's also very easy to lose track of the ball even if it's huge. One bad push and you might as well retry the level. Ideally you want to line yourself to the ball and the goal, so after hitting it one time it flies directly to the goal. Easier said than done though. Took a couple of tries, but we got it eventually. Test number 3 is called Touch and Go 2, and it's another landing pad stage. You start with very little fuel too, so you gotta be fast. One thing I didn't notice until after checking the footage is that every time you land on a platform you regain a bit of fuel back. The course itself isn't super hard, what's hard is having to do it quickly. And it took me less tries than I expected as well. I still needed 2 more points for the medal, so I decided to give it another go. And there's my locked in face again. And now for the final set of tests. These ones will take place in the Everfrost Island. and test number 1 is called Ice Hornet. It's another ring stage. We must go through as many as we can. We got a real crappy score because of a botched landing attempt. Test number 2 is called Balloon Rush, and it's a missile stage again. All balloons are very close to each other here, and we must destroy 20 out of the 30 balloons to receive points. And of course, we must also land in the end. I gave this stage only one attempt because I really wanted to see what the final test was going to be. And test number 3 is called Mecha Hawk again. No, really, that's what the stage is called. And well, it's the same dude again, except this time he'll be swimming. Not just that, but sometimes he also throws stuff at you. It's a tiny bit harder because we must aim at his upper body to damage him. Can you imagine doing this with a limited amount of missiles? I find that the easiest time to hit him is to wait until he starts throwing those rocks at you and just start blasting. Eventually one of them is gonna hit. I then decided to go back to test 1 because of my horrid score. I was sure that I could get the rest of the points needed for the bronze, but turns out I still needed a little bit, so I opted to go do test 2 again since I liked it a lot and I also felt I could improve on my score. In fact, we aced it. And with that, credits roll. You might be wondering by now though, what about the extra levels? For those, you need at least silver on each corresponding class. However, I did feel that I had enough of Pilotwings right now. I enjoyed the game a lot, but not enough to want to grind out the points needed for that. If people are interested, or if they get mad at me, I can always revisit them in the future. Or as I said during the stream, so in the future, once I release the video, if people start getting pissed off at me at why didn't you do the extras? Then we'll do them. Then we'll do the extras and we'll do like a bonus video. You know, we gotta rage bait people into commenting. There you go, that's the strat. That's the pro strat. Overall, the game was very enjoyable. It's a nice relaxing experience. Makes me wonder though, why haven't we gotten a new one? I understand that maybe this game didn't sell as well, especially since it was released alongside Mario 64. But I mean, sit back and think about it for a little while. Can you imagine all the cool stuff that Nintendo could do with this franchise? I really hope that they will eventually at least attempt to make a new one at some point. But anyways, I consider Pilotwings 64 completed. At least for now. If you like this video, feel free to like and subscribe as it helps the channel a lot. I'm also open to feedback, and I'm always looking to improve from one video to the next. With that said, thank you so much for watching, and I wish you all a great day. Now, you know, this is where I would usually put what game comes next, but for this one time, it will be a bit different. Originally, I got Super Robot Tyson 64 as the next game, and I played it for about 6 hours. However, it being a very lengthy Japanese game, I felt like it was going to take forever to finish, and I would like to have a bigger variety of games to show at first, so I don't go months without uploading. It's a one-man show after all. So you might be wondering, what will the next game be? It'll be Scooby-Doo Classic Creep Capers. See you all there.